So I kind of wish I did this podcast maybe in like one of the first couple I did, especially if someone was listening to these in order, because I feel like understanding this concept truly is going to help kind of understand some of the other things that I've spoken about. But I'm doing it late. So anyway, I've just had a few weeks off as well. So if you are someone who listens regularly, I was away for a few weeks, but I'm back now and doing these weekly. So what I'm going to talk about today, and I'm really excited to do this one because I think this concept is so important to understand for performance in all aspects of life, but specifically when we are in the shit, right? I do have a bit of a cold as well, so bear with me, right? There's going to be some coughs through this one, but pain versus suffering, right? It's really important to understand the difference between the two. I think when we think about running or we think about doing something hard and we just kind of group these two concepts together, like, oh, that was a really hard run because of X, Y, and Z, or I had a really hard session today, right? But there's two different types of, I guess, hard, right? With these sessions, you can have a really painful session or you can have a session that you suffer a lot. Now, I'm going to dive into these concepts and we're going to go through a few different things. But the things specifically that we're going to go through, right? We're going to go through the definition of pain. We're going to talk about the definition of suffering. We're going to talk about why you need to understand both of these and then how to put them in practice so that you can get more out of what you're trying to do, right? I'm also going to talk about the three categories that can affect our level of suffering. So things that can actually make you suffer more. And then I'm going to leave you with 5 things that you essentially need to avoid if you want to suffer less, right? And this will all make a bit more sense when I start breaking down these definitions. A lot of people think, even when you think about it now, pain versus suffering, you can probably work out what it is, right? But knowing something and then truly experiencing and truly understanding it are two different things. Just because you fucking can read the definition in dictionary and know, oh, that's pain, that's suffering, they're different. Cool, I'm now a fucking mental toughness guru. Like, you need to experience it. You need to be conscious of it when it's actually happening. And to be able to differentiate the two is when you start seeing these different levels of performance unlocked, right? So I'm going to read off a bit of stuff today because I think with this topic, it's important you understand some of the actual expert definitions of these things rather than the phlegm definition of these things, right? So the definition of pain, which we're all probably pretty aware of what that is, but pain is a sensory and physiological experience that arises from the body's nervous system. It serves as a warning signal that something is wrong and requires attention. Pain can be acute, such as sharp sensation from an injury, or chronic, lasting for an extended period. It is typically associated with physical damage or illness, and its intensity can vary among individuals. So pain isn't a universal human experience, right? It's necessary for our survival and well-being. It alerts us to potential dangers. We fucking need it, right? And when we're going for a run, it lets us know when something is hurting, or if we're doing something hard, it's letting us know, like, hey, listen here, motherfucker, you need to put a Band-Aid on that foot because you got a blister coming, right? It is important and we need to understand it. When we're trying to achieve optimal performance, we obviously want to have as little pain as possible, but a lot of the time pain can be debilitating, right? But sometimes suffering is what stops us. And most of the time I would say it's suffering that's what stops us rather than pain per se. But relating to exercise, I want you to think of pain like this, right? So pain is things like sore knees, blisters, DOMs, cramps, tendons, aches and joints, the things that are a result of you exercising from like a sensory point of view. Okay, that makes sense? Yes. I don't know why I'm asking you a question. You're on a fucking podcast. You can't answer me, but I hope the answer is yes, right? Now, suffering. If we talk about suffering for a second, right? Once again, dictionary definition here. Suffering, on the other hand, is a physiological and emotional response to pain or distressing experiences. It goes beyond the physical sensation and encompasses the thoughts, emotions, and interpretations, really important there, that arise from those experiences. Suffering can manifest as emotional pain, anguish, despair, or a sense of being overwhelmed, right? Now, unlike pain, which is primarily a sensory experience, suffering is subjective and varies from person to person. Very important we understand that, right? It can result from various sources, including physical pain, loss, trauma, disappointment, social isolation, Now, suffering can also happen long after, I guess, this pain has happened, right? Like suffering can go on for as long as we let it go on sometimes. And it does affect our quality of life and well-being, just like pain, but in different ways. Now, that's a lot of information, a lot of points in there, probably pretty obvious. How the fuck do we relate it to exercise? How do we use it to our advantage? That's what I'm going to start covering now, right? Now, before I do, there's a bit of a story that I want to tell you. So the story, how this was explained to me a long time ago, and I really liked it, and I'm going to now give it to you, is I don't remember the origin, but it was definitely something to do with Buddhism, right? But essentially, it's the story of the two arrows, right? So a man is walking in the woods, and he is shot with an arrow, and his reaction, he goes, oh, fuck. Oh, I'm sure he didn't say fuck if it's the Buddhism story, but he goes, fuck, my shoulder. You know, he's bleeding, he's in a lot of pain, he's got this burning sensation, and he's gone, shit, right? That's the first arrow. Now, what happens after that is what's really interesting. He starts worrying, shit, am I going to bleed out? Am I going to be able to get back to my village in time? Am I going to be able to do all the things that I want to do? And all of a sudden, he starts freaking out. He starts worrying about all these other things that are on top of this pain. That is the second arrow, right? So the first arrow that we're shot with is our pain, and our second arrow that we're shot with is our suffering. The second one is a little bit more a lot more in our control, right? That's the way I want you to think about pain and suffering. They're two different things. They're completely two different concepts. And the more we understand that, the more we can separate the two and the more performance we can unlock, right? So next time we're going for a run, we can be like, oh, this knee hurts, but I'm not going to go, wow, this knee hurts. I've still got 7 kilometers left. That's 7 kilometers. That's 1 kilometer 7 times. Wow, that's going to take me 45 minutes. Fuck, I really don't even know why I'm doing this. Blah, that's suffering. And I've spoken in a lot of episodes and a lot about how to, I guess, have strategies in place that you do suffer less without actually saying that's why we're doing it, right? So I've talked about things like accepting, breathing, all of those things which helps us unlock higher levels of performance. But like, what are we actually doing with those? Is we're freeing ourselves from suffering. So it's important that we understand these like tricks of the trade, but then we can blend it with this like overarching concept, which is fucking suffering is different to pain, right? Like it's a completely different thing. And I'm going to talk about a few different other things, but before I do that, I want to explain where I kind of started becoming fascinated in this concept. I think it was around this time I did a spontaneous marathon with a friend, right? And there was like part of this triathlon thing that we were doing. That doesn't really matter. But this guy that I was doing it with, he's a really fit dude. And he's a way better runner than what I was. And he had this awesome, running gait. Like he just moves well. He had a better aerobic capacity. But no matter what, every time we'd get to 25Ks, because we've done it a couple of times together, you would see these problems start to happen. He's probably going to hate me talking about this if he listens to this, but it's almost like you could see him mentally really suffer. And he would wonder to me, hey, your body must be better than mine because you're okay. In my head, I'm still fucked. I'm still in a lot of pain, but I was able to always kind of keep this consistent pace, keep moving forward, where I noticed he couldn't do that. And I could see him kind of break down in front of my eyes both times. And it would be things like hip problems or this other stuff. But I started to think, well, is it just the attitude and some of these suffering things that he's putting on top of this pain? Because I'm feeling this pain in my hip. He's feeling this pain in his hip. I'm able to kind of keep going. So is he, but at a much slower rate. And his is getting way worse, and worse. It's it just kind of hit me hey, wait, maybe there's something to this, right? Maybe it's not just, mental toughness. I'm better at pushing through. Maybe there's this suffering concept. And then I started getting interested in this, and that's where it kind of has followed on from there. And then the more that I've given this light, the more I've realized, holy fucking shit, these are two completely different things. And the people that can push through things, the people can get shit done, eat shit, are the people that understand this difference and are not purposely adding suffering to their pain, right? A lot of the time it's fucking easier said than done, right? That's this whole game that we play, but understanding this is the first step. So that's a bit of my story, but we're going to go into a couple little things now, right? So we often talk about things that make things easier, right? But we should, I think, opposite to that, we should talk about things that make things harder, I guess attitudes, ways of doing things that make exercise and pushing through a lot harder, right? We talk about the things that make it easier. We need to start talking about what makes it harder. Now, a lot of them can be just looked in from an opposite point of view. For example, if one of my tips was about breathing and, controlling your breathing, then obviously the fucking double-edged sword to that would be don't breathe like that and you're going to feel shit, right? So if I talk about acceptance, if you don't accept your situation, it's going to be shit, right? So like there's a lot of things in those benefits, a lot of those benefits you can look at and go, okay, I need to flip these on their head to understand what doesn't work for me, right? Now I was having some trouble trying to group these into like major factors that influence suffering, right? Because you've got your small things that you do, which could be for someone that could be like breaking it down too much, which I spoke about before. So if you're someone who just like thinks about the end too often, that's going to increase your suffering, right? Yeah, you're going to become more anxious, you're going to become impatient, there's more resistance. So that's like one thing, but I was trying to work out how to group these together. So what I've done is I've grouped them into 3 categories, and I think this will be really helpful for you because you can start to look at each of these categories and understand what goes into these. So the first major factor influencing suffering is perception and interpretation, right? So each individual's perception and interpretation of pain or distressing experiences can affect the degree of suffering. Factors such as personal belief, past experiences, and cultural background influences how one responds to and copes with pain or adversity. For example, right, someone with a resilient mindset might interpret pain as a temporary challenge to overcome, while another person may view it as like an unbearable suffering. So your perception and interpretation of what's happening or what you're doing is one of the biggest reasons that something's going to be harder than it needs to be, right? I was trying to think of an example because I like to try and tie these back to, I guess, a nice analogy, like, kind of the story with the arrows. But the best analogy I could come away with was this one, right? When you go for a long drive, maybe you're driving across the state or you're going somewhere 40 minutes, but on the way there, it feels really long. It almost feels like twice as long sometimes. And then when you drive back, you're like, holy shit, that was really quick. And you go, oh yeah, that felt fast, didn't it, guys? And you go, yeah, fucking oath it did, right? Now that is because the idea is that the subjective perception of time slows down during unfamiliar experiences. Say that again, right? So the idea is that the subjective perception of time slows down during unfamiliar experiences. In fucking simple terms, if you haven't done shit, it's going to feel fucking hard. So knowing, hey, and this is the best example here is a marathon. Like everyone who hasn't done a marathon is like, oh yeah, I really need a good training program to do the marathon. And put it bluntly, cunts that have done a marathon are going to be like, I could do a marathon. It's fucking hard, but I could do it. And then when they do it, they're like, yeah, this is fucking hard, but I can do it and I'm going to get it done. But it's like the unfamiliar experiences in life are scary. So we don't do them for one, but also they feel harder. They're not actually necessarily more painful at all. Like that person that's done it and hasn't done it is going to experience potentially the exact same pain. All of a sudden, the level of how fucking hard it is actually determined by suffering. And you can see how this fucking comes together, right? Like you can see how these concepts are different, but they actually overlap perfectly. So that's 1, perception and interpretation. Now 2 is coping strategies. These are the things that I just preach about, right? These are all those little things, those breathing exercises, the acceptance, understanding your why. Like, Goggins has got like the 40% rule and like how he mentally understands things. The coping strategies, the strategies individuals use to manage and cope with pain and distress can influence their level of suffering. So the more tools in your toolbox, the less you're going to suffer potentially, right? That's important. So we want to build the shit out of that. And that's probably the simplest one we can just do. We can just have a bunch of tools. That could be like the, what do I fucking call it? The alter ego, right? I spoke about that. If you've listened to that episode, you could create an alter ego. That could be your coping strategy, right? There's millions of ways you can come up with your own coping strategies, right? This is, enough about that because I've spoken about it a ton. So we're going to move on. Number 3, level of acceptance, right? I've spoken about this a little bit as well, but level of acceptance. So acceptance of pain or distressing experiences is another factor that can impact suffering. Acceptance involves acknowledging and embracing the reality of the situation rather than resisting or denying it. It does not mean giving up or resigning oneself to a life of suffering, but rather allowing space for understanding, adaptation, and finding meaning in the face of challenges. How fucking good is that? I love that, right? Because like what we resist persists. Yeah. The things that we pull away from, the things that we don't accept become really challenging and hard, right? There's so much power in just accepting what we're doing. And you can look at those three, I guess, overarching strategies, right? These big fish strategies that you can break down into smaller things. But these big ticket things, right? 1, 2, and 3, if you were just to focus on those 3 things, you're going to increase or decrease the amount you suffer when you do something hard. So then all of a sudden, hey, now I'm this more mentally tough person, this more resilient person because I now understand pain versus suffering. And understanding something is the first kind of step in improving it, right? Now, there's a bit of a formula about this that I thought was really interesting. So pain times resistance equals suffering, but pain times acceptance equals freedom. I thought that was really cool and a nice way of looking at it. And it's just a nice reminder that when you are suffering, the more you accept it, the freer you feel, the less actual pain you start to feel. So it's a good way of kind of just remembering that. So that's pain times resistance equals suffering. Pain times acceptance equals freedom for all you fucking mathematicians out there. Now, I've spoken a lot in this. What are we up to? Fucking, here we go. Don't even know the time on that. Can't read that. Anyway, I want to leave you with 5 of the major things that I think do increase suffering, right? These are, just like I've kind of in other episodes talked about the things you need to do to push past things. These are the 5 things that you should probably fucking avoid, in my opinion. Some of them, 1 or 2 of them, maybe those things work for you. Like, for example, the breakdown theory is a bit of a controversial one. So for me, I'm really anti, which I've spoken about heaps, running 10Ks, 1K 10 times, breaking it down like that. I find that is like kind of goes against the acceptance rule. I find it kind of like it's conflicting, right? Because on one hand, we're supposed to accept these circumstances, but then we just keep fucking thinking about how long we've got left. But for a lot of people, that works really well. So that's a personal preference on that one. But anyway, these are the 5 things. So number 1, constantly worrying about how long we have left, right? Do not do that. It sucks, right? Yeah, you can break things down, but do not think about how long you have left because that increases your anxiety and suffering. You start thinking, okay, I've got an hour left. I'm already in so much pain. How am I going to do another hour? Why do I want to do this? Bang, negative feelings start flooding in. Suffering through the roof. We don't want that. Number 2, concentrating on the thing that hurts. Obviously, that sounds obvious, right? But a lot of people will just feel like a tweak in their knee and then the whole fucking run, they just think about the tweak in their knee. So don't do that. Easier said than done again. But then flipping it on its head is like, what's the coping strategy for that? It might be acceptance. It might be breathing. It might be technique focus. So rather than thinking, oh, my knee hurts, I'm thinking arms back, head straight. Where's my foot pressure going? If it's a run, maybe it's lifting weights, but your relevant endeavor, focus on that technique efficiency could be a good way of kind of flipping that. 3, talking negative. Some people would just, you exercise with some people on an endurance thing, and I fucking hate this because, pardon me, motherfuckers just speak negatively the whole time, right? Like, let's say you've got this, anytime I do a challenge, I have a rule. I tell all my support crew, don't fucking tell me we've got a long time left, or how are you feeling? And because when they ask me how I'm feeling, I feel shit. So I don't want to tell you that because then I'm openly speaking about how negative this situation is, right? So talking negative can be things like, I don't know why I did this. Do I even want to do this? God, this is so hard. Like, don't verbalize what may be going in your head because that will, when you do verbalize it, it starts to become worse and worse from a suffering point of view. And then number 5, which is one of my favorites, is not understanding your purpose, right? Fastest way to make shit hard is to not have any meaning behind it, right? Now, for some people, this is this concept's still hard because you don't have to necessarily be like, I need to have the biggest purpose in the world behind this goal. Because you might go for a 10K run, which might be pretty easy for you. You don't need to necessarily have purpose behind that. But when things do get really, really tough, we need to have something to lean on. And the more deep work we've done, which I'm going to say 1,000 times, the better this is going to fucking be. And the harder you're going to be able to push. And the more aligned it is with you from a value perspective, the less kind of effort you need to put into that purpose. For example, with that, if you're someone who just loves going for a run, there's not a lot of friction required. So you don't need a lot of purpose because you just love running. That is your purpose, right? But if you're doing something that is a lot of friction, for example, something you really don't want to do or something that is really hard, more friction, more purpose. That's how I want you to think about it, right? If you're going into a situation where it's going to fuck you up a little bit, likely, don't go in there without a purpose, right? So it's a bit of a summary. Pain versus suffering. We need to understand the difference. Pain is the sensory response to something, where suffering is what we attach to that motherfucker, right? There's 3 major categories that you can look at when it comes to suffering and things that you should understand. And then there's 5 little cues you can do, or 5 things you should be aware of so you don't increase your suffering. I hope that has helped you achieve all the fucking things you want to do, and stop thinking about it and just go fucking do it.